Independent investigators in Elijah McClain's death issue scathing report. No police officers were criminally charged in McClain's 2019 death. Well, what could I say? Not surprised. An independent review of the death of Elijah McClain, the 23-year-old black man who died in Colorado after being placed in a carotid hold by police and injected with ketamine, was made public on Monday and alleges the officers had no reasonable suspicion to stop and frisk him in the first place. The report, ordered in July by the Aurora City Council, also concluded that the investigation of McClain's death by the Aurora Police Department's Major Crimes Unit was badly flawed and alleged the detectives stretched the record to exonerate the officers rather than present a neutral version of the facts. This case is a textbook example of law enforcement's disparate and racist treatment of black men, McClain's family and the lawyers said in a joint statement issued following the report's release. Aurora's continued failure to acknowledge the wrongdoing of its employees only exacerbates the problem. According to the statement, McClain's mother, Sheena McClain, is relieved that the truth surrounding the death of her son is finally coming out, adding that if he had lived, he would have celebrated his 25th birthday this week. This report, with its stark and unequivocal indictment of Aurora officials' conduct, is not based on new revelatory evidence. The statement reads, it is based on evidence that Aurora had in its possession all along. Yet at every stage, Aurora has defended its officials for their blatantly unlawful actions and refused to discipline anyone involved in Elijah's death. Aurora City Manager Tim Twalby said in a statement that the city welcomed how comprehensive and thorough the investigators were throughout the investigation. We are currently reviewing their report and looking forward to hearing additional context during their presentation before we comment further. City management will work with the mayor and city council in the coming days and weeks to assure the appropriate next steps are taken. The Aurora City Council plans to hold a special study session Monday night with the panel to which it gave autonomous authority to probe every detail of the 2019 death that prompted massive protests in Colorado and throughout the nation. There was no immediate comment from the Aurora Police Department. The review was led by consultant Jonathan Smith, executive director of the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Urban Affairs. The body-worn camera audio, limited video, and Aurora Police Department major crimes and interviews with the officers tell two contrasting stories. The officers' statements on the scene and in subsequent record interviews suggested a violent and relentless struggle. The report, which was obtained by ABC News, stated the limited video and audio from the body-worn cameras revealed Mr. McClain surrounded by officers, all larger than he, crying out in pain, apologizing, explaining himself, and pleading with the officers. The three white police officers stopped McClain on August 24, 2019, after a 9/11 caller reported McClain was walking down the street wearing a ski mask and acting suspiciously. The investigative panel found that the officers had no probable cause to detain and frisk him. Our police officers Nathan Woodward and Randy Rodina and former officer Jason Rosenblatt were never prosecuted. In June, Dave Young, the former district attorney for Adams and Bloomfield counties, said he could not file criminal charges against the officers because the evidence was inconclusive as to whether their actions caused McClain's death, and because prosecutors could not disprove officers' reasonable belief in the necessary use of force. Wow. Like I said, took away that qualified immunity, and these cops will have to do their job better, and all these cops that are crazy, that are psychopaths behind a badge, will go to jail and prison. Okay? Qualified immunity is basically the judges give police officers, law enforcement personnel, immunity from any wrongdoing they do against a civilian. Basically, that's what it is in a nutshell. The independent investigation alleged the officer, specifically Woodward, quickly escalated the encounter despite having no reason to believe McClain had engaged in any type of criminal behavior. Upon review of the evidence available to the panel, officers Woodward's decision to turn what may have been a consensual encounter with Mr. McClain to an investigatory stop in fewer than 10 seconds did not appear to be supported by any officer's reasonable suspicion that Mr. McClain was engaged in criminal activity. This decision had ramifications for the rest of the encounter, the reporter stated. McClain was walking home in Aurora, a suburb of Denver, after buying iced tea at a corner store when he was stopped by 3 officers. In post-incident interviews with major crime investigators, Woodward explained that he wanted to frisk McClain for weapons based on him having a ski mask on in the middle of the night, though McClain gave no indication that he was armed, according to the report. McClain's family said he was wearing a ski mask because he suffered from anemia, which made him feel cold. We were not able to identify sufficient evidence that Mr. McClain was armed and dangerous in order to justify a pat-down search, the report stated. Woodward and his 2 colleagues moved McClain by force to the grass and restrained him, according to the report. The responding officer applied pain compliance techniques and restraints to Mr. McClain continuously from the first moments of the encounter until he was taken away in a gurney, the report stated. The independent investigators found that officers applied wrist locks on Mr. McClain and put their knees on his large muscle groups and joints. The officers also sat on or kneeled on Mr. McClain, and one officer threatened to have a dog bite him, according to the report. During the struggle, Woodward allegedly placed McClain in a carotid hold, less hazardous than a choke hold, the report said, but investigators wrote they did not see evidence of the officer's perception of a threat that would justify Officer Woodward's carotid hold, which caused Mr. McClain to either partially or fully lose consciousness. Paramedics with the Aurora Fire Rescue responded to the incident and injected Mr. McClain with ketamine, a powerful drug often used to induce anesthesia, in what they claimed was an attempt to sedate him. The evidence reviewed by the panel, including the body camera view, alleged that the paramedics administered the sedative without first examining McClain. The panel found that McClain was given 500 milligrams of ketamine based on a grossly inaccurate and inflated estimate of Mr. McClain's size. Despite his apparent distress and the fact that the carotid control hold had been applied, the body-worn camera footage does not reflect any attempt by Aurora Fire to examine or question Mr. McClain before the administration of ketamine. According to the report, at the time of the injection, Mr. McClain had not moved or made any sounds for about 1 minute. The panel alleged the paramedics accepted what was said by the officer's impression that McClain was exhibiting excited delirium, a syndrome in which a subject displays wild agitation and violent behavior. I saw that video when the story came out about Elijah McClain's death. He barely put up there was no struggle to have a violent agitation. He was pleading for his life. This is horrible. The panel wrote the paramedics drew the conclusion without corroborating that impression through meaningful observation or diagnostic examination of Mr. McClain. Mr. McClain lost consciousness during the encounter and was taken to the hospital where he died 3 days later. The Adams County coroner ruled that the cause of McClain's death to be underdetermined, a decision Young said factored heavily in his decision not to file in the case. Everybody in this in the investigation that was done within law enforcement need to go to jail. Okay, and everybody who did this independent study and found the truth, they need to be rewarded. Okay, and put on panels to make sure this doesn't happen again, overseeing law enforcement activities. I don't condone any of the officers' actions out there. In fact, I wish they would have done things differently. If someone is saying, I can't breathe, get off of them. Just do it. Get off of them. Young told ABC News in June, but again, I have no indication that led to the cause of Mr. McClain's death. The independent investigators also faulted the Aurora Police Department's major crimes investigation. And the report the unit represented to the then District Attorney Young alleges detectives failed to present a neutral, objective version of the facts and seemingly ignored contrary evidence. The report goes on to allege the major crime detectives failed to ask basic critical questions about the justification for the use of force. The Aurora Police Department's major crime homicide unit investigation of the death of Mr. McClain raised serious concerns for the panel and revealed significant weakness in the department's accountability systems, according to the report. The report made several key recommendations, including that the Aurora Police Department undertake a thorough review of its training and supervision of officers with respect to ascertaining reasonable suspicion and probable cause. The panel also recommended the department overhaul its use of force policy and increase the training of officers on de-escalation techniques. Since McClain's death, the Aurora Fire Rescue has banned the use of ketamine by paramedics. The report recommends a thorough review of the department's protocols, policies, and training related to patient sedation to ensure that a complete pre-sedation assessment by paramedics is completed. I wonder the way the paramedics treated Elijah McClain, would they have done this with a white person, a young white 23-year-old who was just like Elijah McClain? I just wonder about that. McClain's family filed a federal wrongful death lawsuit in August against the Aurora Police Department and the Aurora's Fire and Rescue Department. The lawsuit is pending. The city responded to the lawsuit in December, asking that the suit be dismissed, contending Mr. McClain's death was not caused by deliberate incriminating actions by the police officers. I hope they win that lawsuit. I really do. Because this right here is heartbreaking. It really is. And it's sad, but you're seeing more and more that white supremacy is alive and well. So whenever conservatives, white conservatives or black conservatives say that nonsense, talk about Elijah McClain. They need to take away qualified immunity from these police officers. That's what they need to do. All right. This is what I got to say. Tell me what you think in the comments. Like, share, comment, and subscribe later.